Day 3 and all's well. I'm still sane, but my dress code's starting to slip. Jobs I'm going to be doing today. Taking the wheels off, getting it up on axle stands so that I've got more access to everything and I can see what I've got. Take everything off the bulkhead. Then I'll undo the screws on the top of the windscreen here and see if I can find some way of lifting it off. On the seat baits here, I've got some nasty corrosion in the corners down here that I'm going to have to attend to. This is the steering system's remote idler pivot point. It's buried in the front crossmember and it's exposed to the weather, and they are well known for getting jammed inside the chassis when you need to get them out for repairs or refurbishment. So my very first job on the chassis is to get plenty of diesel in around here, loosen these bolts off and give it regular bangs with a large hammer throughout the day, and hopefully by tomorrow it will just pop out by putting the jack underneath it and pushing up. So we're going to take these pinch bolts out. I've now got the chassis up on axle stands as high as my axle stands will go, so everything's at a nice workable height for me. Makes things a lot easier. One of the other things I've done is cut my fingernails ultra short, clawed a bar of soap to get plenty of soap underneath my fingernails, and then I've rubbed my hands with cooking oil until it's soaked in. When I say cooking oil, I mean, you know, the good stuff, extra virgin olive oil, none of this nasty canola stuff. I need a hammer. Something you need to be aware of if you're going to tackle a restoration like this is simply the age of it. It's a 45-year-old vehicle, and many of these parts have not been touched since the day it was assembled. And being a farm vehicle, they simply never get washed. You know, that's an absolute fact. People don't wash farm vehicles. Look at that. But by the time I've finished with this, it's going to be good for another 50 years. Everything will be wire buffed or acid cleaned. And then re-nickel plated and reassembled. Sorry, zinc plated. Zinc plating is really easy to do at home. Simple electrolysis with a car battery charger. So here's the plan. Give this thing a good soaking of diesel. Reapply as necessary, and I'll be giving it some hefty whacks with a good sized hammer throughout the day, just every hour or so, just to give it some vibrations and let that diesel soak down. Well, the wheels are off. I've liberally dieseled everything that's greasy and muddy, and I'll keep doing that for a couple of days until I'm ready to sandblast, and the sandblasting will take all that off really easily. What I'm going to do now is remove the pedals and the brake booster and the clutch assemblies. They're bolted in from inside. The first thing you've got to do is disconnect the spider webs and the wiring. Once that's done, you'll just have the hydraulic hose on the clutch. After that, you'll disconnect the two brake cylinder pipes. One goes to the rear and the other one goes to the front. Just move those out of the way. Then we're going to hop inside and I'm going to rattle gun these bolts loose here, take the springs off. Right, now if I just whip outside, you should be able to remove that. Here's a pleasant little surprise. I've just opened one of the vents and honestly it looks like the day it was made. Landrovers are prone for rust around these openings, but I'm really pleased. The mesh is the best I've ever seen on a Series 3. The flap's just fine, the gasket's great. This really is so far going to be one of those rub me down, paint me up rebuilds. The only thing I've found that's mechanical that needs to be replaced so far is the steering swivel balls. They're very heavily pitted. It's probably been used on a beach. They've got to come out and be replaced, so that's a couple of $100 per side, I believe. Inside the engine bay of a Landrover, just inside the inner guards, you'll find two stout plates. They run from a bulkhead down to the chassis. They provide a lot of torsional stiffness and they should be inspected for cracks when you get them off. This one on the right hand side supports the steering box. I'll just whip out the 4 bolts that hold the steering box on. And then there's another 3 bolts that hold it to the chassis. They'll get removed and that'll leave the 2 footwells open for me to have a good look at, because this is where I'm most likely to find rust. Now here's the thing that sometimes people have trouble with. This is a ball joint for the steering with a taper to keep it centralised here. Now a lot of people think you've got to have a special tool to undo these, but the bush mechanic can do it with one of 2 methods. You can either take the nut off and then turn the nut around and put it back onto the thread. This protects the castellations on the top of the nut, which is where the split pin fits between, and it also protects the threads. If you bring it down to the point where the base of the nut is level with the end of the stud, you're putting it in a position where you're least likely to do any damage. Then the thing to do is to put something in between here to stop it springing, because you want this to float but this to stay where it is. So you find a little bit of something, it's too fat, something like that but smaller. There we go. I'm working hard to do everything on this vehicle with what I've got lying around the place. So I'm making do. If you're in lockdown, everything's about making do. Right, that should be enough to hold it. And now a couple of whacks with a decent sized hammer might see this thing come free. Yep. And then you can just take the nut off. No damage done to the thread. And if it wasn't designed by Landrover, you'd be able to get this out. How on earth do you remove that? Let's whiz the steering to the end of its travel and hopefully yes, just getting to the stage where I can remove this bracket now. 4 more bolts down on the chassis. 4 in here through the bulkhead, and that will be off. It's taken a bit of creativity, but I've got nearly all of the bolts out. There's about 4 left in that I'm just going to have to get the grinder to and take the tops off, and then I can pull the seat base out and I can truly see what I'm working with. Right, next, these ones in the corner. It's going to be a little bit harder to get to. Also, a little bit harder to set the camera up for. Have a look at this. This is what I'm faced with. Everything around the floor has been getting wet and salty and damaged for many, many years without being undone. This is corrosion rather than rust in the seat box. This will necessitate a little bit of alloy welding. We'll cut a piece out, alloy weld a piece in. That's a job for my mate Evan to do. Evan's the guy who did the welds on my 100% aluminium roof rack. All 158 of them, he tells me. I forgot to put it in first gear before I started. Well, it's not even midway through the day yet, and I've done just about all I can. I've undone all of the bolts across the top of the windscreen, and I've got the rear of the body tub ready to lift off, if I can find somebody to help me do it. If not, I'll just busy myself with more cleaning on the chassis. I'll hit it with this air gun, which is full of diesel at the moment, and diesel's just going to be good enough to soften all of the mud and crud that's built up over the years. Then I'll hit it with the water blaster. You'll notice that this doesn't have a lot of pressure. It also doesn't put a hell of a lot on. But it's just better than tipping it or brushing it. Just enough to keep it wet. And I'll do this again in the morning. And depending on whether or not I can get someone to help me lift the body off, I'll clean as much as I can. When I come to sandblast and water blast the frame, I take the frame off where it's mounted now on the suspension, and I suspend it from the frame itself so the suspension's hanging. That opens up the leaves and allows me to get in between them, clean them out. Diesel's only the first stage. Do a couple of these and a couple of water blasts, and then if there's anything stickier, I'll get into it with a water-soluble biodegradable cleaner that I use called Simple Green. I think that's available in most countries. Great stuff, but it's not quite good enough for handling this kind of dirt. This is just a bit too much for it. Well, it looks like everything's coming to a screaming stop. I thought the hardware store was going to be open for tradies, and I've always considered myself a tradie. I have a trade account, but it appears that the hardware store's completely closed. I can buy food and I can get medical attention, but I can't even go out and buy a sheet of sandpaper. So I'm getting more and more stuck for things to do on this project. I could water blast it, but I can't sandblast it because I can't get the sand. I can't start any work on the body because I've got no sandpaper and no paint. I've got a couple of rust repairs that I can do in the bottom corners here, but that doesn't make good video. It's not very exciting to watch. I can't lift the body off because there's only me here, and you've seen the fun that I had getting the motors out of the back. I suppose I could put the wheels back on, push the thing around and get it under the oak tree and winch the thing up into the oak tree, but I think I might have to go and do something far more important, and that, my friends, is build a greenhouse. It does appear that I'm going to have to do some serious seed raising and sprouting over the next few months. If the people around here are going to stay fed, we're all going to have to work together and raise as much produce as we can. So that's where my efforts are going to lie for the next few weeks, making my garden as productive as possible. This will just have to sit and wait.